Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse, and before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains absolutely out of our minds. And today, we are going to discuss a man who is a legend among American history. He did a lot, like a lot. Even more than I can cover in a single video, but I'm going to do my best here. Today we're going to discuss Howard Robert Hughes, Jr. Throughout his lifetime, Howard Hughes would be a successful business tycoon, a record-setting pilot, an engineer, a film producer, and a philanthropist. He was one of the most influential and richest people in the world. But his life was fairly humble at first. I say fairly because he did come from success, but not nearly as much success as he would create on his own. He was the son of Eileen Stone Gano and Howard R. Hughes Sr. His father was an intelligent man and inventor, a successful one. He patented the two-cone roller bit in 1909. That allowed for rotary drilling for oil in places where it wasn't possible before. Naturally, it was highly sought after, but Hughes Sr. was pretty shrewd and intelligent with how he commercialized the invention. He leased it. He didn't sell it. And that created a lot more income for himself and his family. He founded the Hughes Tool Company in 1909 and had several early patents to his name. Hughes Jr. was also tied early on to film. His uncle was famed novelist, screenwriter, and film director Rupert Hughes. Now, Howard Hughes' birthday is a little bit questionable. We aren't really sure. Officially, according to the birth certificate, he was born December 24th, 1905 in Harris County, Texas, but his certificate of baptism lists a different date, September 24th, 1905. Now, normally you would want to go off the official birth certificate, but that was an affidavit birth certificate that was issued in 1941. The certificate of baptism was recorded October 7th, 1906, so it was a lot closer to the actual date when he would have been born. But it was definitely 1905. Hughes Jr., in terms of his intelligence, seemed to follow in his father's footsteps. From an early age, he had an incredible interest in science and technology. He also had a great aptitude for engineering. He built Houston's first wireless radio transmitter at age 11. And he went on to be one of the first licensed ham radio operators in Houston. And at the age of 12, he was photographed for a local newspaper, which identified him as the first boy in Houston to have a motorized bicycle. He had built it from parts of his father's steam engine. The point is, Hughes was a pretty sharp individual, even as a boy. But he wasn't necessarily a great student. This tends to happen with geniuses sometimes. They're so smart and so ahead of a lot of other kids that they tend to get bored with regular school. He did like learning things, but only stuff he was interested in, namely math, flying, and mechanics. In fact, his passion for aeronautics would take him quite far, and he took his first flying lesson at the age of 14. However, tragedy would hit Hughes pretty early on as well. His mother died in March of 1922 due to complications from an ectopic pregnancy. His father died just 2 years after that, of a sudden heart attack in 1924. Losing his parents so quickly, due to ailments that actually could have been treated with modern medical technology, inspired Hughes to later establish a medical research laboratory. He wound up inheriting 75% of his family's fortune. It's worth mentioning the Howard Hughes Medical Institute is actually still around today as a non-profit medical research organization. It's based in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Hughes officially founded this organization in 1953, and it's the second wealthiest philanthropic organization in the United States. But back to Hughes himself. In his early 20s, he actually thought about just being a professional golfer. He really liked golf his entire life, for the most part, and he was pretty good at it. He actually golfed with some of the top players of the time. But he rarely played competitively, and he got kind of bored of playing it as, like, a job. It wasn't really what he was interested in doing. At least not when it came to work. Golf was fun for him, not work. While he was at William Marsh Rice University, he actually withdrew from it shortly after his father died, and then on June 1st, 1925, he married a woman named Ella Botts Rice. It was then that he and his wife moved to LA to pursue his dream of becoming a filmmaker. Due to his wealthy inheritance, he definitely had the money to produce plenty of films on his own. He had his share of hits and failures over the years, though some of his more notable ones include Hell's Angels, which he'd also directed, and Scarface.
Say hello to my little friend!
Not that one, the 1932 Scarface. He was actually pushing the envelope with a lot of his films because some of the content he put in there wasn't considered appropriate at the time. Scarface was delayed due to concerns involving its violent nature. Another film called The Outlaw, which initially premiered in 1943, wasn't released nationally until 1946 because the lead actress, Jane Russell, had a lot of revealing costumes in it. Now, Hughes was a busy man, so it's hard for me to really explain what he was doing at any given time in order without boring you. So I really am giving you an abridged version of each element of his life. Worth mentioning, he divorced his wife in 1929. That owes to his particular interest in, shall we say, the ladies. Hughes loved the Hollywood starlets of the time, and is known to have dated many of them. His known involvements include Joan Crawford, Billy Dove, Faith Domergue, Betty Davis, Yvonne DiCarlo, Ava Gardner, Olivia de Havilland, Katharine Hepburn, Hedy Lamarr, Ginger Rogers, Janet Leigh, Pat Sheehan, Amy Van Doren, and Gene Tierney. He actually proposed to Joan Fontaine several times, according to her autobiography. Jean Harlow actually accompanied him to the premiere of Hell's Angels, but apparently he didn't actually date her. Their relationship was strictly professional, as Hughes didn't like her very much, at least on a personal level. Hughes was also known to be friends with Jane Russell, although apparently he never sought any romantic involvement with her, with the sole exception of once, when he was drunk, Russell told him no, and he would wind up apologizing for his behavior, and promised it would never happen again. And it didn't. They remained friends for many years. And even after his romantic involvement with Gene Tierney ended, he remained good friends with her. Tierney's attitude towards Hughes was summed up with a quote, "I don't think Howard could love anything that did not have a motor in it." Okay, that's really funny though. To Hughes' credit, his worst trait was his inability to remain loyal. The man got around is what I'm trying to say, always jumping to one woman to the next, but he was rarely impolite or rude to any of the women he was involved in. In fact, him and Tierney, again, remained friends. When her daughter, Daria, was born deaf and blind, with a severe learning disability, Hughes personally saw to it that she would receive the best medical care and wound up paying all of her expenses out of his own pocket. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, he was a womanizer. There's no question of that. But he wasn't necessarily cruel. He would wind up getting married again on January 12, 1957, to actress Jean Peters. He had actually met her before she became a film actress. Some believe that Peters may be the only woman he had ever loved, and he was a little overbearing about it. Some sources say he actually had his security officers follow her everywhere she went, even when they weren't in a relationship. Which is a little creepy, actually, in retrospect. That's a little too far. So was most of his money being built on the films? Or was it the inheritance? Well, partially, but he's also heavily involved in the very profitable real estate business. The Howard Hughes Corporation made sure that land became the principal asset for his empire. He acquired 1,200 acres in Culver City for Hughes aircraft, bought 7 sections, 4,480 acres, in Tucson for his Falcon missile plant, and purchased 25,000 acres near Las Vegas. Hughes owned a ton of properties, and many of those properties led into further profits for himself. He was, in his way, a genius, and he also had a heavy involvement in aviation and aerospace. He loved flying. Like I said, he took his first flight lesson at the age of 14. He personally set many world records, and commissioned the construction of custom aircraft for himself, while he led the Hughes Aircraft Company. The most notable one out of this time was probably the Hughes H-1 Racer, which on September 13, 1935, set the land plane airspeed record of 352 miles per hour. That's 566 kilometers per hour, which was blindingly fast at that time. That also marked the last time in history that an aircraft built by a private individual set the world airspeed record. The Hughes Aircraft Company was actually a division of the Hughes Tool Company, which he put together in 1932. While he was doing this, true to Hughes's eccentricities, which we're going to get to, he used the alias Charles Howard to accept a job as a baggage handler for American Airlines. He eventually was promoted to co-pilot, and he continued working for them until his real identity was discovered. During World War II, the Hughes Aircraft Company was a major defense contractor, and attempted to produce multiple different aircraft for the war effort, though not a single one actually wound up in service during the war. Most of what the company wound up doing, and where they made most of the money, was working as a branch plant for the construction of other companies' designs. He did have his own designs, though. The Hughes D-2 was a fighter and bomber project that actually started out as a private venture, but the prototype wound up looking a little weird, and the Army didn't really have a role for it. Initial flight tests also showed serious flight control problems. Its modifications still weren't finished by November of 1944 when it was destroyed in a hangar fire, reportedly caused by a lightning strike. There was also the Hughes XF-11, which also never got finished during the war, and emerged in 1946 as an all-metal twin-boom 3-seat reconnaissance aircraft. By that point, the military had no use for such a thing, and it was not actually brought into service. Then there was the one everybody knows, the H-4 Hercules. Some of you probably call this the Spruce Goose, which was not a name that Hughes himself called it, and he hated it with every fiber of his being. It was called the Spruce Goose by critics who didn't believe that such an enormous aircraft could actually even get off the ground. The Hercules was massive, living up to its name. It was meant to transport troops and equipment across the Atlantic as an alternative to seagoing troop transport ships. Basically doing what modern transports do all the time, but well before that was thought to be possible. The Hercules only ever technically flew once, though, as Hughes wound up under scrutiny from the Senate under the suspicion of completely mismanaging both the XF-11 and the H-4 Hercules projects. He would actually deflect these criticisms and continue on as he usually did.
Contract figure, which, as I said to you, shows a loss. I did not make any profit on my war contract.
The Hercules only ever flew one time, with Hughes personally at the controls. This thing, I can't stress enough, was really big chungus, even by today's standards, let alone back then. It was the world's largest flying boat, the largest aircraft ever made from wood, and its wingspan was 319 feet 11 inches. That's 97.51 meters. It was massive. Hughes took it up on November 2nd, 1947. It flew for 1 mile, 70 feet above the water. Technically, that would put it in a ground effect, but people thought it couldn't fly at all, and Hughes proved them wrong. Now we know that it was very forward-thinking for him to attempt to do this, as there are many large aircraft that regularly take off at any given time. Would the Hercules have been successful had it actually been finished? That's unclear. The project was never seen fully to fruition, though the original Hercules was kept around by Hughes, stored in a climate-controlled hangar, because he frankly adored the aircraft. Hughes also purchased stock in other airlines, such as Trans World Airlines, which helped substantially increase his fortunes when regular commercial air travel proceeded to take off like crazy in the 1950s. And I can go on and on and on about all his business dealings. The dude was out of control, but he was rich. Filthy, stinkin' rich. However, his mental state proceeded to decline, especially as he got older. There's a lot of stories about Hughes. Some are true, some aren't. I'm going to tell you the true ones. That's what I do here. And, yeah, he was kind of nuts. But it probably wasn't all completely his fault necessarily. He had chronic pain, for one thing, as he was involved in several airplane crashes during testing, such as when one of the XF-11 prototypes went down on July 7th, 1946. That crash nearly killed him. And an earlier crash of a Sikorsky S-43 certainly didn't do him any favors either. He was always considered eccentric, and he suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, which only got worse as he got older. He had several things about him that, just couldn't be changed, because OCD. It's a pretty well-understood ailment nowadays, but back then it wasn't so commonly known. For one thing, he always ate the same exact thing for dinner. A New York strip steak cooked medium rare, dinner salad, and peas, but only the smaller peas! He pushed the big ones aside. For breakfast, he always wanted his eggs cooked the way his family cook, Lily, had made them. and he had a big phobia about germs, which is pretty common for OCD patients. He also was known to be a secretive man, but eventually that became completely maniacal. Even during some of his earlier movies, he became fixated on many small, annoying things. Richard Fleischer, who had directed His Kind of Woman with Hughes as executive producer, found him completely mind-numbing. Hughes would get stuck on trivial details while at the same time being completely indecisive and obstinate. He was known to have unpredictable mood swings, making Fleischer's job that much more difficult. In 1958, Hughes told his aides that he wanted to screen some movies at a film studio near his home. That wouldn't be super unusual, but was a bit more unusual that he stayed in the studio's darkened screening room for more than 4 months, never leaving. He ate only chocolate bars and chicken and drank only milk, and he was surrounded by dozens of boxes of Kleenex that he continuously stacked and rearranged for some reason. He wrote very detailed memos to his aides, giving them explicit instructions to neither look at him or speak to him unless spoken to. And throughout that time, he sat fixated in his chair, often naked, continuously watching movies. When he finally emerged in the summer of 1958, his hygiene was abysmal because, of course it was. He hadn't bathed or cut his hair and nails for weeks. And on the surface that sounds completely insane, because it is, but it may have been due to a medical ailment known as allodynia. It's a condition in which pain is caused by a stimulus that does not normally elicit pain. The reason he was naked, for example, is that it's thought that just wearing clothes may have hurt him. Just after the screening room incident, he moved into a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel, where he also rented rooms for his aides, his wife, as well as his numerous girlfriends. Because, yeah, he was never faithful. That was one thing about him. He sat naked in his own room, again, watching movies. Allodynia really does make sense for this, as one of the ways that patients tend to distract themselves from the pain caused by it is to, distract themselves. And it's not known if he ever received adequate treatment for the condition. In 1 year, he spent $11 million at that hotel. Even some of his business dealings were affected by his OCD. At one point, he began purchasing restaurant chains and 4-star hotels. That in itself was fairly normal for him. But only ones that had been founded within the state of Texas. These purchases actually included many unknown franchises that were at that point out of business. Then, later, in 1968, he became obsessed with the film Ice Station Zebra. He didn't have anything to do with its production, by the way. Ice Station Zebra is not known as a particularly great film. It's kind of fine, middle of the road, but it failed at the box office, and isn't exactly a cinematic classic. Well, Hughes adored it. He watched it at least 150 times. And he owned a local TV station and would regularly call them and insist that they air the film whenever he wanted. That wasn't the only time he ever did that. He was involved in the ill-fated John Wayne film, The Conqueror. That was a commercial and critical flop, so he bought every single copy of it for $12 million and watched it on repeat for reasons I fail to understand. In his early years, he was one of the most visible men in America, a bit of a cult of personality. But as he got older, he became a total recluse, very rarely leaving, wherever he decided to live at that point. He became addicted to the opiate codeine in an effort to deal with his chronic pain, and he only had his hair cut and nails trimmed once a year, again, possibly due to how painful the process was for him. Oh, and he stored his urine in bottles? I don't really know why he did that, but he did. In the late 60s, he began jumping from one hotel to another, taking up residence in the top floor penthouse suites. During the last 10 years of his life, he lived in many different hotels in many different cities. Beverly Hills, Boston, Las Vegas, Nassau, Freeport, and Vancouver. Las Vegas is where he really left one last mark on the world. He moved into the Desert Inn on November 24th, 1966. The owners quickly became annoyed with him when he refused to leave in any way, and, was, frankly, very eccentric and obnoxious. So in order to avoid conflicts with them, he just bought the inn. Which, that does fix that problem, doesn't it? The hotel's 8th floor then became the center of his empire, and the 9th floor penthouse became his personal residence. Between 1966 and 1968, he bought several other hotel casinos in the area, including Castaways, New Frontier, the Landmark Hotel and Casino, and the Sands. He also bought the small Silver Slipper casino. Not because he actually wanted it for profitability, he wanted it because it was known for the trademark neon silver slipper on the front, which happened to be visible from his bedroom. Apparently it kept him awake at night, so he bought the place just to remove the slipper. Hughes did whatever he wanted is what I'm trying to say. But he wasn't without vision, even in his elderly years. He wanted to change the image of Las Vegas into something a lot more glamorous. Something that was desired, sought after, that would bring people in and make the casinos more money. If you are familiar with Las Vegas nowadays, you see how he totally succeeded in that. But he was really losing his edge. His decision-making was not what it once was. He was dealing with the effects of neurosyphilis, which had been diagnosed in 1932, as well as his already existing, undiagnosed OCD. A small panel, unofficially dubbed the Mormon Mafia, for the many Latter-day Saints that happened to be on the committee, was led by a man named Frank William Gay. They had originally served Hughes' secret police headquartered at 700 Romaine, but over the next 2 decades, they oversaw and controlled considerable business holdings, with the CIA anointing Gay while awarding a contract to the Hughes Corporation to acquire sensitive information on a sunken Russian submarine. This was the sort of thing that Hughes himself could not really be involved in. The committee supervised day-to-day business operations, as well as Hughes' health. They went through great pains to satisfy his every whim while they dealt with actual business. At one point, Hughes became fond of Baskin-Robbins banana nut ice cream, so his aides sought to secure a bulk shipment for him. But Baskin-Robbins had actually discontinued that flavor, and they put in a request for the smallest amount the company could provide for a special order, which turned out to be 350 gallons, 1,300 liters of ice cream, and had it shipped from LA to Las Vegas. A few days after it arrived, though, Hughes announced that he was tired of banana nuts and wanted only French vanilla ice cream now. No more of that banana nut stuff. As a result, the Desert Inn ended up distributing free banana nut ice cream to casino customers for a year. So I guess it worked out for the general population. Hey, free ice cream. He also put up considerable resistance to nuclear testing in the area. Bombs were being detonated at the nearby Nevada test site, and he was concerned about the risk from residual nuclear radiation, and he attempted to halt the tests. Despite his eccentricities, and despite his weird demands, and despite the fact that he was kind of losing his mind, he was right about this. The tests went through despite his efforts, and the detonations were powerful enough that the entire hotel in which he was living trembled from the shockwaves. He also instructed his representatives to offer bribes of $1 million to both Presidents Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon. Neither one is believed to have been accepted. In 1970, Jean Peters filed for divorce from Hughes. They hadn't actually lived together in many years. Peters requested a lifetime alimony payment of $70,000 a year, and she waived all claims to Hughes' estate. Interestingly, Hughes seemed to hold some affection for Peters, as she did for him. He never insisted on a confidentiality agreement as a condition of the divorce, and Hughes apparently never spoke ill of her after she left him. Peters, for her part, refused to discuss her life with Hughes, and declined several lucrative offers from publishers and biographers who sought to make a killing on that kind of information, but she generally kept it to herself for the most part, implying that there must have been some love, or at least some respect, between them. The only thing Peters ever said was that she had not seen Hughes for several years before the divorce, and had dealt with him only over the phone. Even in his later life, Hughes was a well-known figure, and there was even an autobiography hoax when a man named Clifford Irving claimed he had co-written and authorized Hughes' biography. This proved out to be completely untrue. Hughes himself had to denounce him in a teleconference attended by reporters Hughes knew personally. Interestingly, his association with aircraft would follow him to his death. He died on board an aircraft, Learjet 24B N855W, on April 5th, 1976, at 1:27 p.m. His reclusive nature, as well as his drug use, had made him practically unrecognizable. His hair, beard, fingernails, and toenails were long, and he had been a tall man at 6 foot 4 inches. But he only weighed 90 pounds when he died. The FBI had to use fingerprints to conclusively identify his remains. The autopsy that followed showed kidney failure as the cause of death. He suffered from malnutrition and was covered in bed sores. and x-rays revealed 5 broken-off hypodermic needles in the flesh of his arms. He was buried next to his parents at Glenwood Cemetery in Houston, Texas. He was 70 years old. Settling his estate proved to be a complete and total nightmare. He did have a will, but it was handwritten, and it was found on the desk of an official of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's called the Mormon Will, and gave $1.56 billion to various charitable organizations, including $625 million to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, nearly $470 million to the upper management in Hughes companies and to his aides, $156 million to his first cousin, William Loomis, and $156 million split equally between his 2 ex-wives, Ella Rice and John Peters. The Mormon Will was deemed a forgery in 1978 by a Nevada court, and it was officially declared that Hughes had died intestate, without a valid will. So his $2.5 billion was eventually split in 1983 among 22 of his cousins, including William Loomis, who serves as a trustee of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. The Supreme Court of the U.S. ruled that Hughes Aircraft was also owned by the Medical Institute, who sold it to General Motors in 1985 for $5.2 billion. And the court rejected suits by the states of California and Texas, who both claimed that they were owed inheritance tax. The estate also paid an undisclosed amount to actress Terry Moore. She claimed that she and Hughes had secretly married on a yacht in international waters off Mexico in 1949 and never actually divorced, but she never provided proof of that. It seems the estate may have just paid it off to keep her quiet, and she wrote a book about it too, called The Beauty and the Billionaire, which became a bestseller. Either way though, Hughes was, well, a person. He was eccentric at best, but he was good at what he did. He contributed a ton to the aerospace industry, as well as to the film industry, and the medical institute he founded still helps people even now, so he did wind up using some of the immense wealth he had to help people around him. He was, well, a total maniac, but that's not known as being unusual, especially for geniuses.